There's a particular kind of quiet that doesn't feel like quiet at all. It feels like something pressing against the inside of your chest, soft, patient, almost polite, waiting for you to stop talking so it can say what it has always meant to say. I didn't understand that until I watched a prince stand in a doorway for 47 seconds without speaking a single word, and somehow change every person in the room. Let me take you there. Windsor, October, Thursday afternoon. The light that falls on Windsor in October does something strange. It comes in low and sideways through the old windows, and it makes everything look like a painting that someone left out in the rain, beautiful but slightly exhausted. The kind of light that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. I was there for work, a documentary project. 3 weeks of access, and I was on day 11, which meant the initial thrill had worn off, and I was starting to notice the smaller things. The way the footmen walked. Not walked exactly, but processed, like they were performing the concept of walking for a portrait painter. The way certain doors were always kept slightly open, and certain other doors were always closed. The kind of things you only see when you stop trying to see the big things. I'd set up my equipment in a side corridor on the second floor, the one that connects the private apartments to a formal reception room used for foreign dignitary meetings. Not a glamorous location. No chandeliers, no red carpet. Just a long hallway with a runner that had been walked thin, and a painting of someone's horse on one wall that had been there so long the frame was starting to separate. I was waiting for a logistics briefing. 30 minutes of nothing. So I sat, and I watched, and I started paying attention to the door at the end of the corridor. It opened at 2:14 p.m. 3 advisors came out first. I recognized 2 of them, one from the Foreign Affairs brief, one I'd seen at the state dinner the previous Tuesday. They were talking, not loudly. That contained rapid murmur of people who've just come from a meeting that hasn't finished going the way anyone expected. Then there was a pause, the kind of pause that has shape, and then the prince came out. I won't use his name here. Not because of protocol, though there is protocol, but because the moment I name him, you'll fill in everything you think you know about him, and what I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with what you think you know. He was younger than I expected up close. That sounds like a ridiculous thing to say about someone whose face you've seen in papers and on stamps and on commemorative biscuit tins, but it's true. There's a version of royalty that exists in photographs, and it is upright and lacquered and very far away. In person, in that low October light, he looked like someone who was tired and trying not to let it show, which, I would come to understand, was not quite the same thing as the exhaustion I was thinking of. He stopped in the doorway, one hand on the frame. His advisors had already moved 6-7 feet ahead. One of them was gesturing, pointing at something on a folder, talking about a schedule adjustment. The words reached me like sound through water. Rearranged. Dinner moved. Ambassador arriving at 6, not 7. The prince wasn't listening to any of it. He was looking at the painting of the horse. Now, I need you to understand something about this painting. It is not a remarkable painting. It is the kind of painting that exists in corridors because a corridor must have something on its walls. And this was the thing that got put there. Brown horse, gray background, competent but uninspired. I had walked past it 11 times in 3 days, and the most I thought about it was I should remember to walk on the other side of the corridor, so I stopped seeing this painting. The prince looked at it for 11 seconds, not a casual glance, not a polite flicker of the eyes while thinking about something else. He looked, one of his advisors, the Foreign Affairs one, Harrison, I later found out, stopped mid-sentence, turned around, saw the prince standing at the doorway, looking at the horse painting. Harrison waited. The other advisor waited. I, from my chair 12 feet away with a camera, I was not. At this moment, recording with, waited 47 seconds. I know because I counted. Not because I am the kind of person who counts things, I am very much not, but because there was nothing else to do, and the silence had a texture that made time strange, and counting was the only way I had of being sure that time was, in fact, still moving. 47 seconds, then the prince said, "Move it to 6:30. Harrison blinked. Sir, the ambassador. Not 6, not 7. 6:30. He looked away from the painting. He'll have come from Heathrow. If we're at 6, he's rushed and defensive. If we're at 7, he's had time to settle and he'll dig in on the maritime question. 6:30, he's just caught his breath. He'll still want the meeting to go well. Harrison looked down at his folder, then up. 6:30, he said. Yes, sir. The prince walked past the painting without looking at it again. His footsteps were quiet on the thin runner. He turned the corner. He was gone. I didn't know what I'd just seen. I wrote it down anyway. 3 lines in a notebook. 2:14 p.m. doorway pause. 47 seconds. Horse painting. 6:30. Then I went to my logistics briefing and forgot about it for 5 days. The thing is, and this is the thing, 5 days later, I saw it again. The State Correspondence Room. Tuesday, 10 a.m., the State Correspondence Room is exactly what it sounds like, and also nothing like what you'd imagine. There is no ornate desk, no quill pen, no sealing wax and signet ring. It is a large, well-lit room with several long tables, stacks of briefing papers arranged with the kind of precision that suggests someone is compensating for a deeper disorder, and the persistent smell of very strong tea that nobody has found the source of in at least 3 decades. I had permission to observe a morning working session. Rare access. I sat in a corner with a second camera operator, Ria, who had worked on 3 of these access documentaries before and had the calm, attentive stillness of someone who has learned to become furniture. 7 people in the room, 4 staff, 2 aides, the prince. The discussion, I'm simplifying, but only slightly, was about a proposed youth initiative. A joint program with 2 other European royal houses, budget, logistics, media rollout. The kind of meeting where everything has been pre-decided except for the 4 things that haven't, which are also the 4 things that matter most. I watched the room work, the staff talked, the aides talked. Someone brought a second tray of tea, and someone else moved it to a different table, and someone argued gently about whether a particular school in Manchester should be included in the regional rollout list. The prince sat at the head of the table. And here is the thing. He didn't speak. Not for the first 22 minutes. He didn't speak. He listened. He read. He occasionally wrote something in the margin of a paper, but he didn't say a word. And the room, I noticed this slowly. And then I noticed it all at once. The room filled that silence the way water fills a container. Each person, in their own way, was speaking to the silence, explaining to it, justifying to it. The Manchester argument went longer than it needed to because nobody had told them to stop. The budget figure got revised upward, then sideways, then back down, because nobody had said which direction was right. The media rollout question got answered 3 different ways in 14 minutes, and the prince sat and listened and let the room exhaust itself. Then, minute 23, he set down his pen. That's all he did, set down his pen. The room stopped. Not all at once. In a ripple, the way a stone dropped in water sends rings outward. The person closest to him stopped first, then the person next to them. Then the argument at the far end of the table died, and there were 7 people sitting in a state correspondence room in Windsor Castle not saying anything. And the silence now belonged to the prince and not to them. He let it sit for a moment. Then he said, the Manchester school, yes, and the budget stays where it was before the 11 o'clock revision. And the rollout starts with the media people, not the schools, because the schools don't need to be convinced, the media does. He picked up his pen. Thank you, let's carry on. And the room just exhaled, like something had been answered. Not just the practical questions, though those too, but something underneath them, something the room hadn't even known it was asking. Ria leaned over to me. She didn't say anything. She just raised one eyebrow. I raised both of mine back. We both went back to watching that evening. My temporary office. Notebooks open. I started to notice it as a pattern that night. Not a habit yet, not in my mind. Just a recurrence. The prince had a way of entering rooms the way weather enters a room. Not intrusively, just present. And he didn't speak first. He waited, and the waiting had a quality to it, not passive, not absent. More like listening in 3 dimensions, like he was collecting something, and when he had enough of it, then he spoke. I asked one of the senior household staff, a woman named Margaret, who had worked there for 23 years and had the kind of institutional memory that makes historians nervous, whether this was something she'd noticed. She looked at me for a moment. The way people look at you when you've said something obvious, he's always been like that, she said, even as a boy. He'd watch everyone finish saying the wrong thing, And then he'd say the right thing. Drove his tutors absolutely mad. They thought he wasn't paying attention. He was paying more attention than any of them. She poured herself tea. You know what? It's like working for someone who waits. It's unsettling at first. You're not used to it. You fill up all the silence with everything you didn't mean to say. All the things you were keeping careful. She set down the teapot. After a while, you learn to say the thing you actually mean, because you know he's going to wait for you to get to it anyway. I wrote that down. I underlined the last part twice. The following Monday, a private garden, 8:15 a.m. I found out about this later, from two sources independently, which I take as the threshold for writing it down as something that actually happened. There was a junior aide, 23, 24, first real posting of her career. She'd come in on Saturday with a brief she'd spent 31 hours preparing, a policy summary that was supposed to take 20 minutes to present, and had turned into something more like a dissertation on EU trade alignment, because she was nervous. And when she was nervous, she thorough-ed herself into incoherence. The prince had received the brief on Sunday evening. Monday morning, 8:15, he'd sent word that he'd like to speak with her in the East Garden, not a formal setting. The East Garden in October is just a garden, leaves coming down, the kind of damp cold that smells like soil and last week's rain, a bench that someone forgot to put away for the season. She found him there, standing at the edge of the lawn, looking at the tree line. She started talking immediately. This is what she told my source later, with the specific mortified clarity of someone who has replayed something 100 times. She started talking, apologized for the length of the brief, explained her reasoning, offered to do a condensed version, apologized again. The prince listened, let her finish, let the silence after her finish sit for a moment. Then he turned around. The brief was good, he said. The conclusion on page 41, the one about the agricultural tariff window, that's the thing no one else has noticed yet. That's what matters. He paused. Next time, put that on page 1. She said, yes, sir. He nodded, started walking back toward the house. Then he stopped, turned back. How long did it take you? 31 hours, sir. He looked at her for a moment, the kind of look that doesn't reduce you. That's the right number of hours for something no one else noticed, he said. Then he went inside. She stood in the cold garden for a moment longer. My source told me, the one who heard this directly from the aide, that when she described that moment, standing in the cold with the leaves coming down and the thing about page 41 still warm in her ears, she said, I didn't feel like he'd been kind to me. I felt like he'd been accurate, which was somehow so much better. I kept thinking about that. Accurate, not kind. Accurate. Because kindness, you can perform. Kindness has a script. Good work. Well done. Thank you for your effort. The words that cost nothing because they've been said so many times they've gone smooth, like a coin handled too long. But accuracy requires that you listened, really listened. Listened past the 31 hours and the apology and the nervousness all the way to page 41, to the thing no one else had noticed. You can't fake that with words, no matter how well you arrange them. And this was the thing I was beginning to understand about the prince and his silence. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't a power move. The way some people hold silence, the way they make you uncomfortable on purpose, make you fill the air with things you'll regret. Because silence weaponized is an old trick, and it works, and powerful people know it. This was something else. This was silence as receipt. He was quiet because he was taking something in, fully, without the noise of his own opinions getting in the way of what was actually being said. And when he finally spoke, when he'd collected enough of what the room was actually saying underneath what the room thought it was saying, what came out wasn't a response to the surface conversation, it was a response to the real one, 47 seconds by the horse painting. He'll just have caught his breath. He'll still want the meeting to go well. He'd watched the advisors talk. He'd heard the problem underneath the scheduling discussion, the ambassador's psychological state, the way tired defensive people dig in, the way a person who's just caught their breath still wants things to go right. 22 minutes in the state correspondence room. The thing no one else has noticed. Put it on page 1. He'd let the room exhaust every wrong answer before offering the right one. Not because he was cruel or strategic or playing some long game of dominance, because the room needed to hear itself first. I had 3 more days of access after that. On the last day, a Wednesday, cold rain coming in from the north. I was packing up my equipment in the side corridor, the one with the thin runner and the horse painting. The prince walked past. He was alone, which was unusual. No aides, no Harrison, just him in a dark coat, moving from one part of the building to another. He slowed when he passed the painting. Not 47 seconds this time, 4. Then he kept walking. He was almost to the end of the corridor when he said, "Not to me exactly, more to the space between us, the horse's left eye. It's slightly too high." The painter knew it was wrong and painted it anyway. I've always wondered why. He turned the corner. I stood there with my equipment case in my hand, looked at the painting. He was right. The left eye was slightly too high. I'd walked past this painting 14 times in 3 weeks and never seen it. He'd seen it the first time. He'd just been waiting to find out if anyone else had. There are rooms that decide things, not the grand rooms, not the ones with the oil portraits and the gilded ceilings and the flags that haven't moved in 30 years. Those rooms are for ceremony, for documentation, for the record that will go into archives that nobody reads for 100 years. The rooms that actually decide things are smaller, warmer, they smell like old carpet, and too many people in the specific kind of anxiety that comes from being in a situation where nobody knows who's in charge yet. I wasn't supposed to be in that room, but I was there. 6 months after Windsor, a different location. I can't name the building. I can tell you it was in London, that it had 5 floors and none of the elevators worked properly, and that the meeting room on the 3rd floor had a window that faced a brick wall and a whiteboard that somebody had tried to clean and made worse. The prince was there because there was a problem. I'll describe the problem the way it was described to me in the corridor 20 minutes before the meeting started by a man named Elliot, who was head of communications and had the specific exhausted look of someone who has been awake since 4 a.m. handling something they were told 3 weeks ago would never happen. A member of the extended royal household, not immediate family, but close enough for it to matter, had given an interview, not authorized, not discussed, not cleared with anyone. An interview to an international outlet in which several things were said about several people. And by the time Elliot described it to me, it had been live for 4 hours, and the meeting room on the 3rd floor contained 9 people who all had different opinions about what should happen next, and had spent the last 40 minutes expressing those opinions without listening to any of them. The prince walked in at 11:03 a.m. I want you to feel what this room was like. 9 people around a table that was meant for 6, so 3 people were on chairs pulled in from the edges, and everything was slightly too close to everything else. 2 laptops open, a phone face up in the middle of the table showing a news aggregator that was refreshing itself every 40 seconds. Every time it refreshed, someone looked at it. Every time someone looked at it, someone else said something sharp. The whiteboard had 6 things written on it. 4 of them were crossed out. One of them said, "No" in capital letters, and then a question mark as if someone had started to argue and then wasn't sure. Elliot was on his feet near the window. There was a woman named Cressida, legal, sitting with her arms crossed in the way that means she has already decided something and is waiting for the room to catch up. There were 2 others from communications, one from private affairs, one from the household, who seemed to be there mostly because nobody had told him he didn't need to be. Everyone was talking, not arguing exactly. The British way of it, very controlled, very measured, with the specific verbal precision of people being polite while meaning things they cannot say directly. But the volume had been climbing for 40 minutes and the edges were starting to show. Then the prince came in. He had Harrison with him, always Harrison, and one other person I didn't recognize, a woman in her 40s who sat down immediately and opened a laptop and didn't look up. The room continued. Elliot turned to address the prince mid-sentence, pivoting from what he'd been saying to a rehearsed version of what he wanted the prince to know, and began summarizing. Fast, efficient. The way you summarize when you've been waiting to summarize, and you're worried that if you stop, someone else will start. The prince sat down, didn't stop Elliot, didn't hold up a hand, just sat down with the same stillness he'd had in the corridor by the horse painting, and let the summary happen. Then Cressida, because Cressida had been waiting, interrupted. With respect, the legal exposure here isn't the interview itself, it's the 3rd paragraph. The specific language around the financial arrangement, that paragraph is the one that matters and it needs to be addressed before anything else. Elliot, if we address it directly, we're confirming the frame. Cressida, if we don't address it, we're confirming the frame and looking evasive. Elliot, that is not what I said. The phone on the table refreshed. Someone looked at it. Someone else said something sharp. The prince looked at the whiteboard. The 6 things, 4 crossed out, no, in capitals. He looked at it the way he'd looked at the horse painting, and I had the thought, the specific, slightly unhinged thought, of someone who had been following this man for several months now, that he was reading it the way you read a room. Not the words, but the shape they made. What they said about the people who'd written them. What they said about the problem underneath the problem. 43 minutes. That's how long the room went on. Elliot against Cressida. Cressida against the household man. The 2 communications people talking to each other in the way people talk to each other when they've already agreed, but need the room to watch them agree. Harrison quietly taking notes. The woman with the laptop doing something I still don't know what. The phone refreshed 14 times. The prince didn't speak once. Here's what I noticed at minute 12. Elliot said something about audience perception, specifically that a certain response framing would land badly with the demographic that matters. He used those words, the demographic that matters. The prince's pen stopped moving. He didn't say anything. His pen just stopped for 2 seconds, and then he made a mark in the margin of whatever he was reading. At minute 28, Cressida said, "We have precedent for this." 2019. The handling then was to absorb and redirect, and the numbers bore that out within 72 hours. The prince looked up, not at Cressida, at the whiteboard, at NO. At minute 37, the household man said, with the specific misery of someone who knows they are saying the wrong thing. Could we perhaps ask, is there a version in which the individual in question might agree to issue a "No," said Cressida. "We've tried," said Elliot. The household man went quiet, and the prince wrote something down. Minute 43. The room was tired. This is the thing about rooms like this. They run on adrenaline for 40 minutes, and then the adrenaline goes and what's left is 9 people who are still disagreeing but no longer have the energy to do it expressively. The phone refreshed. Nobody looked at it. Into this particular grade of exhausted silence, the prince put down his pen. "The 2019 comparison doesn't hold," he said. The room turned to him, not all at once, in that same ripple. In 2019, the thing being discussed was peripheral, interpretable. This is neither. So the absorb and redirect approach won't work here because there's nothing ambiguous to redirect to. He looked at Cressida. "You're right about the 3rd paragraph. You're right that it's the thing that matters. You're wrong about the sequence. Address it last, not first. If you address it first, it's the only thing anyone remembers." Cressida opened her mouth. "Elliot," the prince said without looking away from her, "the framing question is the right question, but the wrong version of it, you're asking how it lands with the demographic. The actual question is whether it gives the person who was in that interview a reason to say more. If it does, if the response creates any kind of opening, they will take it. So the frame isn't about perception, it's about closure." He looked at the whiteboard. 3rd point. The household channel stays out of this, not because it can't contribute, because if it's seen to contribute, the story changes shape, and we're answering a different question than the one we're currently in. He paused. "Let that sit. Draft response, no statement of position. 3 sentences, acknowledge the conversation happened. Express that all such matters are handled through appropriate channels. Close." He looked at Elliot. "Not 4 sentences. 3? Elliot was writing. Cressida's arms had uncrossed. The household man had the expression of a person who has just been quietly and specifically told to go home, and somehow feels grateful for it. "Questions," said the prince. Nobody had questions, not because they'd been shut down. Because all the questions they'd been shouting at each other for 43 minutes had, in the space of approximately 90 seconds, been sorted, weighed, and either answered or set aside with a reason. The room exhaled. Same as the state correspondence room, same release. Like something that had been held too tightly finally loosening. I asked Harrison about it afterward. We were in the corridor while everyone else filed out. He was capping his pen, the specific, deliberate movement of someone who has been taking notes for a very long time and has made peace with his own tidiness. Does he always do that? I said. Wait like that? Harrison thought about it. He says there's no point speaking until the room has finished saying what it's going to say. He capped the pen. His word for it when he talks about it, which isn't often, is gradient. He says you can't read the gradient of a room while you're still adding to it. Gradient, like a slope, like the tilt of a surface that tells you which direction water will run. You can't feel the slope you're standing on if you're moving. You have to stop, let the room move. Watch where it goes, and then you know where the water is going to run before it starts running. There is a thing that happens in rooms with powerful people. It happens in boardrooms and cabinet rooms and crisis communications rooms. And it also happens in much smaller rooms, in arguments between friends, in family dinners, in conversations that are going sideways, and everyone can feel it, but nobody knows how to stop. The thing is this, everyone speaks to the version of themselves they want to win. They're not speaking to the problem. They're not speaking to the other people. They're speaking to an imaginary version of the resolution that has them in it correctly, that has them being right or being heard, or being the one who said the thing that mattered. And because everyone is doing this at the same time, the room fills up with noise that is entirely sincere and entirely useless, because it is all pointing at different imaginary resolutions. The prince, by being quiet, forced the room to speak to something other than itself. Or, and I think this is closer to it, his silence was the thing that the room eventually started speaking to. When there was nothing to agree with or argue against or perform intelligence at, the room started slowly expositing its actual problem, because there was nowhere else to put it. And by the time he spoke, he wasn't responding to what anyone had said. He was responding to what the room had been trying to say the whole time. 3 weeks after the crisis meeting, a reception evening. Cressida told me something at a reception 3 weeks later, when the whole situation had been, as the prince predicted, absorbed and closed within 72 hours. She'd had a glass of wine, not many, but enough for the specific candidness that sits just past professional propriety. I've worked with 4 people at his level, she said. 4 in 20 years. And all 4 of them. All 4, I could feel them loading the next thing they wanted to say while I was still talking. Like a gun being cocked behind polite eyes, she looked at her glass. He doesn't do that. He just waits, I said. He just waits, she said. And at first it's unnerving, because you're used to the cocking, you're calibrated to it. When it doesn't happen, you think something's wrong. You talk faster, you over-explain, you say the thing you were keeping careful. She paused. Then you realize he's going to wait until you've finished, not just saying the right thing, but finding it, and then he'll say the thing you were circling around. She took a sip. It's efficient, she said, with a kind of wonder. It's the most efficient thing I've ever seen. He just lets you arrive, and then he confirms what you arrived at, and somehow that's faster than any of us talking at each other for 43 minutes. I thought about that for a long time after. He lets you arrive, like a destination, like something you were already moving toward, and the silence just cleared the path. There is a habit that most people have. Not a bad habit exactly, just a deeply human one. We speak before the silence has finished. We hear a pause and we fill it, not because we're cruel or inconsiderate or uninterested in what the other person is saying, because silence feels like an ending, like something went wrong, like the conversation is at risk and it's our job to save it, so we talk. We say the next thing, the obvious thing, the easy thing, the thing that doesn't require us to have listened very closely, and the conversation continues, and nobody has to sit in the uncomfortable space where the real thing might have appeared. The prince had learned or been formed by something into the opposite reflex. He heard a pause and stayed in it. He let silence accumulate until it had enough weight to tell him what it meant. And what silence means, when you let it accumulate, when you don't fill it with your own nervous presence, is almost always something truer than what was being said out loud. Margaret, the household staff with 23 years and the institutional memory, told me one more thing before I finished my access period. She told it to me in the kitchen, the real kitchen, not the formal one, the one with the mismatched mugs and the biscuit tin that said Royal Household on the outside and contained what appeared to be an emergency supply of digestives. When he was very young, she said, he had a tutor who was frustrated with him. thought he wasn't engaged, thought he wasn't there mentally. So the tutor complained. And whoever was responsible arranged a meeting, one of those soft, diplomatic meetings where you convey a concern without quite saying it. She poured tea. The boy sat through the whole meeting, let everyone talk, the tutor, the liaison, the aide who was managing it all. 20 minutes of concerned, careful language about engagement and presence, and all the words people use when they don't want to say a child isn't performing. She set down the pot at the end. He said, "Mr. Clark talks while he's still deciding what he thinks. By the time he finishes the sentence, he's changed his mind. So if I respond to the beginning of the sentence, I'm answering the wrong question." She looked at me over her mug. He was 9. 9 years old, and he had already understood something that most people, brilliant people, educated people, people who had been trained to communicate, never quite get to. That speaking is not, primarily, an output. It is a response to something real, to something finished, to what a person actually means rather than the first draft of what they're trying to figure out how to say. And if you speak before you have that, before the room or the person or the moment has finished arriving at what it actually means, you are always answering the wrong question.